Hey y'all, just a quick little announcement before we get started with today's show. This episode is being released on October 30th, 2019. So if you're listening sometime in the future, you can probably just skip ahead about 90 seconds or so. But if you're listening with us as these episodes are being released, this is a reminder that Phil and I are going to be going to North Carolina next week to attend the C.S. Lewis Influence and Relevance Today International Symposium. While we're there, we're going to be hearing from speakers and authors like Dr. Don King and Dr. Diana Gleiser. And Douglas Gresham, C.S. Lewis's own stepson, will be there as well, too, giving some interviews and talking about the upcoming Netflix adaptations. I'm mentioning this really quickly for two reasons. One, if you are a listener of the show and are headed to the conference, shoot us a message on social media. We'd love to talk about C.S. Lewis with you while you're there. And two, we wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to our patrons over at patreon.com whose support of the show has made this trip possible for us. We are extremely thankful for your generosity and support. So again, that is in a week. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about on the show once we return, and hopefully lots of the knowledge that we receive will make its way into the rest of the season of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So without further ado, here is Chapter 3, The Lone Islands. Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is Chapter 3 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Lone Islands.
Land must be in sight.
How long have you been thinking about that one?
About 2 seconds.
Yeah, I realized, because I was editing the first two chapters, and I realized that we start each episode, I did a little intro thing, you say something, and then I just laugh, and we just start off right here on a very non-serious note. And so
But this is serious.
This is very serious.
Very serious.
So we need to just come in next time, just be extremely not having fun, and just how do you think? What do you think about it?
Chapter 3.
This is Chapter 3.
The Lone Islands.
Well, we have it's an interesting chapter. I guess we'll wait till we get into our thoughts. So why don't we take care of business right up here first?
Let's hear a summary.
Well, in the last chapter first, we're going to do a little last
Okay.
chapter thing here. In the last chapter, the children learned more about Caspian's voyage. We found out he's on the search for these 7 lords who his usurper uncle Miraz sent out from Narnia, and he's going to either find them and bring them back or avenge their deaths. And that's pretty much where the chapter ended. We know a little bit about where they're headed to, but not much. So here is the chapter summary for Chapter 3. The Dawn Treader approaches the Lone Islands. Caspian, Lucy, Edmund, Eustace, and Reepicheep decide to walk across the mostly remote island of Felimath on their way to Dorne. On this quick journey, the band of adventurers are kidnapped by slave traders, who tie them up and begin taking them to a market to be sold. On their way there, Caspian is sold to a man on Felimath. Shortly after the slavers leave, the man who bought Caspian is revealed to be the Lord Byrne. Byrne and Caspian reboard the Dawn Treader and decide they don't have the sheer force to overwhelm the wicked people living on Dorne. They decide to run up signals to make it seem as if they have more sailors and soldiers than they truly do. Before the coming battle, the crew of the Dawn Treader spend the evening feasting at the Lord Byrne's house on Dorne.
Well done.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. This is it's an interesting chapter, isn't it?
It's a ramping up chapter.
It really is.
We're introducing a little bit more conflict. We have new characters that don't really agree with our current set of characters.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of great little details peppered throughout. And one that I'll say just to kind of transition us in is how they only keep sheep on Felimath. It's just such a funny concept.
Yeah, it's cool.
So there's 3 islands. There are 3 islands, but one of them they just keep sheep on.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes the place feel lived in, and it also raises some questions that don't get answered in a good way.
It's very like classic C.S. Lewis world building. It's not this Tolkien-esque, here's all the names of the people who live there and their history. It's like, no, they just keep some sheep over there.
Yeah.
It's fun. I love that.
But it is that loneliness and the isolation that makes them want to walk across it.
Yeah.
And then they're in for a pretty big surprise.
Yeah, I love that. I can't wait to talk more about it. Well, I think we should jump in. You want to do it?
Yes.
So the chapter begins with land in sight being shouted by someone on the Dawn Treader. The Pevensies, Lucy and Edmund, they recognize they've been to Felimath and Dorne before. And again, I think I'm pronouncing everything correctly because I've been listening to the audiobook, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah.
Like
it's a different speaker for each book, and this speaker you really like.
I really like it. He does the voices for the characters. He adds a lot of emotion. It is a really, really fun time when I'm listening in my car or while I'm like doing chores and stuff. So listeners, if you haven't checked that out, go over to Audible, or wherever you listen to audiobooks. They don't sponsor us, but it's great. I really love it. So Felimath and Dorne, Lucy's so excited. She's like, it's been a long time since we've been here. And C.S. Lewis responds to a little question that Caspian has, which is, I don't even remember how these became a part of Narnia because they're so far off. He's like, did Peter the High King conquer them? And C.S. Lewis writes, by the way, I have never yet heard how these remote islands became attached to the crown of Narnia. If I ever do, and if the story is at all interesting, I may put it in some other book.
So just tell me now, as someone who's read most of the books.
It is not.
It's not? Okay.
No. At least not. Well, you and I, Horse and His Boy, we don't know.
That's
so
right.
It could be in His Horse and His Boy. I don't think it is.
This is what it's like, by the way.
Oh, yeah. This is what it's like for you to
But
podcast.
not knowing.
You're like, everyone's listening to me right now. I could easily be wrong about everything, and all of our listeners are going to be upset. But we have great listeners, so they wouldn't abandon us just because they don't. If they didn't like that we don't know everything, they have not made it into season 3. They jumped off this ship a long time ago. So after C.S. Lewis breaks the fourth wall there for a second, we have some of a conversation between the rest of our characters on deck. And Caspian says that he'd love to stretch his legs and wants to walk across Felimath, which is mostly an island of loneliness. It's grass and clovers and soft sea air, as Lucy says. And they decide, that would be a great idea to kind of walk across this island. And if anyone has a map, which you can easily Google, I don't know what this is like as a Narnia podcaster because I have so many maps for this book right now that I don't know what to do with myself. You can see how close these islands are. Felimath and Dorne almost run parallel to one another, and so they're going to walk across Felimath as the Dawn Treader goes around it, and then kind of meets them on the other side to take them over to Narrowhaven, which is the town on Dorne. And I want to read a little bit from this section. The king, the mouse, the two Pevensies, and Eustace all got into the boat and were pulled to the beach of Felimath. When the boat had left them and was being rowed back, they all turned and looked round. They were surprised at how small the Dawn Treader looked. Lucy, of course, was barefoot, having kicked off her shoes while swimming. But that is no hardship if one is going to walk on downy turf. It was delightful to be ashore again and to smell the earth and grass, even if at first the ground seemed to be pitching up and down like a ship, as it usually does for a while if one has been at sea. It was much warmer here than it had been on board, and Lucy found the sand pleasant to her feet as they crossed it. There was a lark singing. They struck inland and up a fairly steep, though low hill. At the top, of course, they looked back, and there was the Dawn Treader shining like a great bright insect and crawling slowly northwestward with her oars. Then they went over the ridge and could see her no longer. Dorne now lay ahead before them, divided from Felimath by a channel about a mile wide. Behind it and to the left lay Avra. The little white town of Narrowhaven on Dorne was easily seen. I love this description of these islands. I'm just also a sucker for this tropical setting as well. Not tropical, but this nautical setting, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I love it. I love the description of them being out, walking across the beach and going across this island. I love the imagery that I'm picturing in my head here.
I'm picturing Scotland for some reason. Are you getting any of that?
No, but I think you're probably closer to maybe what even Lewis was picturing. We've talked about my love for Lost on the show before, and it's hard for me to think of people being on an island and not picture stuff from Lost. So even though I don't think this should look like Hawaii, but yeah, that's what I picture.
So in the special features for the movie Brave, the Pixar movie,
okay,
there is a group that gets to go to Scotland.
Cool.
And there are these very large green squishy areas, and people just kind of jump on them.
What?
It's like the whole field is like this like big squishy trampoline type thing.
Whoa,
It looks so fun. That's what I'm picturing.
That's what you're picturing?
Yeah.
That's cool.
I know it's not quite like that, but
No, at
least the colors.
That's also the beauty of literature is that we can, that what it looks like in my head might look differently than your head. And we draw from our own experiences in that. So, well, what happens next, Phil?
Then we run into some interesting characters.
Tell me about them.
They're just sitting around, and there's something, the way it's described, you can tell there's something off, and they approach him anyway. And to add to the tension, Caspian's like, let's not mention that
I'm the king.
I'm the king and that I technically rule these people. It might be a touchy subject.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends up being a good thing because they get kidnapped. And they're not really aware of how valuable the people they kidnapped would be to the folks back home.
This is the first mention in the Chronicles of Narnia of anything to do with Calormen. And I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm probably not because I'm Daniel and this is the Lamppost Listener podcast, and that's kind of what I do here. So it's unclear to me if these slave traders are Calormens themselves. I think we can infer that they are, but it doesn't actually come out and say it. Lewis doesn't. He just says the Calormen crescent, which is the chief coin in those parts, is worth about 1/3 of a pound. So he's talking about the traders they're the slave merchants, is the words that C.S. Lewis says. They're trading in this kind of currency. Mm-hmm. So Calormen are from they're from mostly we learn about them in The Horse and His Boy. That's about all I know about them, and then they show up again in the last battle, but I don't want to talk about the last battle. Okay. And I know they are a really big part of The Horse and His Boy, but not familiar with the story. So I do know that they come up a lot, and yet they're kind of just dropped in here.
Right.
So we can't really say much more without all of my knowledge about them comes from the last battle, which is it would be inappropriate of me to bring up here.
Yeah.
So it kind of is pointless that I'm even pointing it out, but here we are.
See you in 2023.
No, I think we'll get The Horse and His Boy in like 2 years, right?
2021.
I think so. It's a great Vampire Weekend song. It's off their new record this year, 2021. First one's free, Vampire. We got to stop making that joke.
I was holding back, and then you went and said it.
Well, Phil, what do you make of this exchange of the slave? I mean, this is pretty...
these are some bad dudes.
This is awful, and also it's pretty dark. I know we had, the savior of Narnia die 2 books ago. But, introducing slave trade here into Narnia, that's pretty...
Here's the thing, though. I think that youth books should have the rough stuff because there's rough stuff in the world, and you're going to have to deal with it at some point. And this is a way to get introduced to it.
Yeah, oh yeah, please
and, introduced to what evils are in the world and have been in the world.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm upset that C.S. Lewis included this. It's just this is kind of a.
You're just acknowledging that it's dark.
This is a little bit darker than what we've dealt with here in Narnia. I think even though the tone that C.S. Lewis is using in his writing here, I don't think we're to believe, especially this early on in the book, that our main characters are really that much in danger. Mm-hmm. Here on page, according to my Kindle, page 20, but it still is. This is pretty. Dark stuff for a book that lots of 8, 9, 10-year-olds are reading. So, yeah. But I think Lewis does some really great writing here. The character of the main slaver, I don't think we get a name for him, but this is such great writing by Lewis because he's kind of juggling this darker subject here with some light humor with Eustace and Reepicheep here, and kind of. Reepicheep's just attitude of calling him a poltroon and a coward, and Eustace being like, "Well, where's the British consul?
Yeah, is there a British consul there? Is there a witch?"
Yeah, and it's funny. He even says, the slaver says, "Well, I've had enough of this jabber. The mouse is a fair treat, but this one would talk the hind leg off a donkey. Off we go, mates." And then he also says just a half a page before that, after Reepicheep calls him a coward, he goes, "It can talk."
Yeah.
And so there is this juxtaposition here of our main characters being kidnapped next to some pretty funny exchanges from who are very horrible people doing a very, very horrible thing, but we're kind of laughing a little bit along with them. So I don't think this is supposed to be like a giant climax at the end of a book where you're like, oh, what's actually going to happen here? Like, oh, this is just another bump in the road.
Yeah. I love the contrast here where we see, so we have these like kind of scraggly looking guys, and then soon at that moment, a fine looking bearded man came out of one of the houses, an inn, I think, and said, "Well, Pug, more of your usual wares." And just the fact that they say a fine looking bearded man is so funny to me, because I think that we tend to associate like mean looking characters with evil, and then here's a fine looking man, so like maybe this guy will save it somehow.
So that man that you just described, we're about to find out, is the Lord Byrne. He's in an inn on this supposedly uninhabited island, but
that has an inn.
Yeah, that has an inn. I think we would both agree that, the recon of the Pevensies is not great after 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So he comes out. He lets us know that our slaver's name is Pug, which is a great name for a slaver, because I don't think that's a very good name.
It's a great name for a bad character for some reason.
Exactly. And apologies to any of our listeners named Pug. Phil said it, not me. I can actually I'll edit this so it makes it sound like you. I'm just kidding. And he comes out and he purchases Caspian. So let me ask you this, because I've read this story before, Phil. When you read this, did you feel like, oh, this has gotten worse now they're getting separated, or did you have a sense that something was going to be okay?
He was a fine-looking bearded man, so naturally I trusted him.
Okay. Because it could be one of those things where he's one of those bad guys in a story that looks beautiful, or is very presentable, but actually deep down is very bad. But this to you, you're feeling, okay, I'm comfortable about this.
I am. Also, it is weird, because if he's really a good guy, why is he buying another person? Like, he shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
But in this case, it kind of seems like he's doing it to free him, hopefully, because he recognizes something about him.
So after this very despicable transaction, the Pevensies, along with Eustace and Reepicheep, are taken away. They're taken towards the slave ship. We hear a little bit about what happens to them. They see some Galmians and Terebinthians, but they don't see anybody that they recognize. And everyone, I want to read this little part. And there they sat in the straw and wondered what was happening to Caspian, and tried to stop Eustace, talking as if everyone except himself was to blame. And I do like these little asides, because Eustace is my favorite character in the book, and we don't get a lot from him in this chapter at all. Yeah. We get asking for the British consul.
He's literally gagged.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is kind of nice for a chapter.
But I do love these like quick asides and to me, those are little character moments. They really, because not a lot of character moments here in this chapter. But we still continue to remember, Eustace is just a really unlikable person. Even in the midst of this, he's just blaming other people. He's literally been captured by slave traders, and somehow we still don't really feel that bad for him, right? And that's how I'm feeling. I feel horrible for the rest of our characters, but Eustace, I'm kind of like, he's so annoying.
Yeah.
But let's travel back, though, to Caspian and the fine-looking bearded man who he is now with. What's happening there, Phil?
Yeah, so there's a fine-looking man. He purchases Caspian, and then he reveals to Caspian why. He says, well, you remind me of someone. And Caspian starts to suspect maybe he's referring to his father, King Caspian before him. And then Caspian decides to risk it all and just say, hey, that I'm Caspian's son. I'm now King Caspian.
Yeah. And so we get a little bit of Byrne's backstory here, because Caspian says, what is your own story? And he says, I came thus far with my 6 fellows, loved a girl of the islands, and felt I had had enough of the sea. And there was no purpose in returning to Narnia while your majesty's uncle held the reins. So I married and have lived here ever since. And I love the simplicity of his little story. Just like, I got sick of the sea, and I fell in love with somebody, so I've stayed here. And I think it's cool that the very first Lord we met is slightly anticlimactic. I don't know if you think back to last chapter, when you first hear of these 7 lords, I'm like, oh, I bet they fought all kinds of
lands.
Yeah, and you're like,
turns out they're little Jimmy Buffett.
They're parrot heads. They're Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
They're Jimmy Buffett's the Vampire Slayers. I think what's really cool about this is because this feels real.
It does, yeah.
And we don't give Narnia enough credit for this, I don't think. Maybe we do. We do have a whole podcast about this, so obviously we're big fans. One of the things I really love about Lewis's writing here is he can take these extremely fantastical stories, right? And these magic lands and stuff, but he also his storytelling, while mythic in many ways, still retains just almost the monotony of regular life to make it feel real. It wasn't that Lord Byrne conquered a bunch of lands and fought in these epic wars. He just I got tired. And so I did this, and I've lived a really happy, simple life here.
I think all the battles and stuff are great, but to have a element like this where he just kind of wanted to stop. He got tired of the sea. That's a really nice contrast for all the battles, because I'm sure we'll have some battles later.
Yeah, it's a really I really like this story and this kind of backstory for the Lord Byrne.
Let's talk about Caspian's reaction. He's like, yeah, I loved a girl on the island and got married and just kind of settled down. Caspian's like, does the governor still acknowledge my rule?
Cassian's such a teenager. He could care less about this guy. He asks him what's his story, and when he doesn't get that cool response, he's like, no. So tell me more about, do they know I'm king here?
Yeah.
And this too, by the way, I love Caspian in this book. I wasn't his biggest fan. I think he gets swallowed up in his own story in Prince Caspian, but he really is acting like a teenage king, and I mean that in both a good way and bad way. Yeah. I mean, he makes this very foolish decision in hindsight to get off of his own boat and walk across this island. I mean, this is why we're here, is because he made a poor decision. And even here, he's just acting like a teenager. But yet I love, as a reader, he feels so much more fully realized as a character. He feels more developed. He has those kind of character flaws in him that make him feel like a real living, breathing character to me. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to see a lot more of his successes later on in the book. But here, him making some mistakes here, I really like that we start off the book with some kind of poor decision-making from him.
Yeah. But also, what we're about to see coming up is them, he's also open to the advice that he receives.
Yeah.
Because Lord Byrne is like, man, I wouldn't try to actually fight, but you need to make a show of force and make it look like you're ready for a fight.
And that is like this complicated character, right, of Caspian, who is both kind of struggling with, I know you told me your story, I don't care, I want to just know about the governor and if, I'm king. And I don't think that's Caspian, by the way, saying, I just want people to know that I'm king. I think it's Caspian saying, hey, we've got a problem we need to solve, and I
need to know the facts. And
so he's just kind of jumping in without really going through the regular hoops that you might go through in a normal social interaction. It's like, that sounds great. How is your wife? Or something like that. You just, hey, we got to fight. Yeah. And you see a lot of his passion come out in this too. And so, like you just said, we learn that Gumpus acknowledges who is, by the way, is the governor of the Lone Islands. He acknowledges Caspian really in name only. He'll do some stuff in his name, but he won't deny his allegiance, but he's not going to support Caspian. In fact,
he wouldn't be super excited if he showed up.
Exactly. And if you do show up and say you're the king, he'll pretend like he doesn't believe you. Yeah. And so they're kind of at a tough place here. And Byrne makes the council, he shares that 30 people on one small ship is not really going to be what you need. And so back on the Dawn Treader, they have a conversation, which I think you're going to read, right?
Right. Steer straight down this channel, Captain, said Byrne, and then round to Avra, where my own estates are. But first, run up the king's banner, hang out all the shields, and send as many men to the fighting top as you can. And about 5 bowshots hence, when you get open sea on your port bow, run up a few signals. Signals? To whom? Said Drinian. Why, to all the other ships we haven't got, but which it might be well that Gumpus thinks we have. Oh, I see, said Drinian, rubbing his hands. And they'll read our signals. What shall I say? Whole fleet round the south of Avra and assemble at Burnstead, said Lord Byrne. That'll do excellently. Their whole journey, if there were any ships, would be out of sight from Narrowhaven. Did he name it after himself?
Burnstead, I think, might be like the homestead of the Lord Byrne.
Okay.
So I think so. I think that's what we're to make here. Because at the end of the chapter, right, they go back to his house and he's got his fields. And so I think that is the right place, his big house that overlooks the bay. Let's talk about this plan. What do you make of it?
It's a good plan.
Okay.
They don't have a ton of people, but they're going to make it look like they have a ton of people. They're going to send up signals that they're assuming are going to get intercepted, and they're also going to make it look like all the other ships they have are going someplace where you can't see them, which makes it more likely to be believed.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I really appreciate about the Dawn Treader in general, the book I mean, is it's such an interesting approach to an adventure story. And it being the third book in this series, there's this expectation, obviously, that you've read the first two. And so we've already had the battles, and we had Caspian and all the martial imagery and the conquest and the wars and stuff. And so there's a part of me as I read this that is disappointed that we aren't going to have some big battle between the people of the Lone Islands and the sailors of the Dawn Treader. And because there's probably like, oh, wouldn't it be so cool because they'll overwhelm them and Aslan will show up and they'll just defeat them or something. But instead the plan's like, we're just going to outsmart them. And I actually really like this the more I think about it, because it's not a disappointment. It's a really beautiful way. Not beautiful. It's a different way of solving an issue. We've already been able to read in Narnia of these more epic conquests, or the like fights, not really conquests, but these battles between good and evil. And yet here instead, let's not fight them with force, let's outwit them. And so it might feel, because I'm so used to, maybe you are too, as readers of fantasy, I'm used to it always being solved through some kind of battle, that this is a battle of wits instead. Mm. And I love that Lewis does that. And I don't know if this would work if this is the first book. Right?
You got to have that. You have to have the first battle in the original.
Exactly.
But now that we've established that, you don't need it as much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general, the Dawn Treader is such a different experience from the first two books, but I do think it would be weaker if you just picked it up off the shelf. Not even just for the character things that you wouldn't understand, right? But just in general, the storytelling approach, I don't think this kind of episodic storytelling would work if we hadn't already spent two books in this world.
Right.
So then the chapter ends with the Dawn Treader and its crew heading over to what we believe to be Bernstead, which is where the Lord Byrne lives.
Let's wrap up with a description of what they see once they get to Bernstead, which is Lord Byrne's home. Byrne's people, many of whom they saw working in the fields, were all freemen, and it was a happy and prosperous fief. Here they all went ashore and were royally feasted in a low pillared house overlooking the bay. Byrne and his gracious wife and merry daughters made them good cheer. But after dark, Byrne sent a messenger over by boat to Dorne to order some preparations. He did not say exactly what, for the following day.
And then I have a really beautiful picture here. I'll see if I can post it, of the Dawn Treader with all of its banners hanging out, and it's in full color here on my Kindle.
Oh, that's nice.
And I know I don't always like bringing these up just because I then sometimes have trouble finding them and putting them. If I can find a picture of it, I'll put it in the show notes. It is the Dawn Treader. Can we talk about this for a second? It just looks so small. I know that's the point.
Yeah.
But there's part of me, and I think this is what's coming out of me as I read this chapter, is I want everything to be epic and the highest of fantasies, and this is not what this story is.
Yep.
It's a small story. This isn't saving the world. This is going on an adventure. We've got a small ship. We're going to outwit them with our brains and not with our swords. And
it's kind of like you're expecting a warrior, and instead you got a baby that was raised in a barn.
That's pretty good, dude. So I mean, I really
do wonder if C.S. Lewis is kind of pulling from that, either consciously or unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of great stories have that, where there's a character, usually a kid,
mm-hmm.
Because this is in a way youth literature, but the kid, no one's really expecting a ton from them.
Yeah.
And then they go above and beyond, and so no one's really expecting this to be like this awesome, cool ship, but
it really is.
It is. And it is in a different way.
Yeah, I'm really excited I know we're here still at the beginning of the season. I am really excited to keep exploring this idea, because honestly, that's one of my main emotions towards this book, which I absolutely adore, is just, I wish the ship was bigger, or I wish this thing was more epic. And I think it like you said, there's a biblical connection to all of this. I always want the best. And I mean, that's a lot of times that's my own flesh, but sometimes it's just normal. I expect this, but that's just not what we see in the Bible. That's not what the gospel is.
Yeah. Blessed are the meek and all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best points you've ever made on the show, Phil, because I had not at all made that connection. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners might not have yet either. So,
well, I didn't until you pulled up the picture and started talking about it. Just
the picture of the ship.
Yeah, but then also started talking about it, how you were expecting this big. You weren't expecting a big ship for this, but it just seemed small. You're like, how are you going to fight in that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great place for us to end, Phil. Do you have any final thoughts before we get into listener feedback?
I don't. Let's hear some feedback.
So we've got an email here from Bruce that I'm going to go ahead and read. Hi, Daniel and Phil. I was really happy to find your podcast recently and have been binge listening on my commutes. But now I'm bummed that I've caught up and will have to wait 2 weeks until your next podcast. I wanted to jump in and start talking to you on so many different topics, but I'll limit myself to 4. In the podcast where Lucy could see Aslan and the others couldn't, I thought of 2 hymns that connected to the text. When Lucy fixed her eyes on Aslan, it made me think of the hymn, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. Later, when Aslan breathed on Susan, I thought of the hymn, Breathe on Me, Breath of God. I wonder if Lewis had either of these in mind. They're both by English writers and old enough that they would have been in Anglican hymnals when Lewis was around. Of course, these are drawing on biblical imagery and phrases, so he could have just gotten things directly from the original. You've commented a couple times on how brief the description of actual battles is in Lewis. I think this may be in part due to his war experience. I'm not a veteran, but I've known several, and generally they'll tell you lots of stories about training or the camaraderie on the base, but at least those I've known don't really like to talk about the actual fighting. To jump authors and quote Faramir, Ophelia, I know you haven't read The Lord of the Rings, but this is one of the best quotes in the entire book. This is from Faramir. I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend.
Wow.
That is a good quote. Yeah, I love that.
He says it's called The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, check it out. I'm sure your library might have a copy or 2.
Or 3.
Yeah. Bruce keeps writing. You ask people which book is their favorite. For me, it's The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Without saying any spoilers, I'll just say it's because of the story arc of a character who goes through a personal transformation. I do have one question for Phil. How do you not read ahead? These chapters are short enough that you could easily read a few in one sitting. I don't think I'd be able to come to the end of a chapter and then not see what happens for the next 2 weeks.
Well, Bruce, it's not easy. And I've actually found that when we are prepping for the last few episodes of a season, I just fly through the chapters.
Yeah.
So the self-control kind of wears down. But what does keep me going is that it seems to be kind of a fun element of the show where I don't always know what's going to happen. And so I kind of keep that in mind when I'm not reading ahead. But Lewis is a really good writer. And for example, my note at the end of this chapter is I'm just looking forward to what's happening. Yeah. And this chapter in particular, I did prep ahead a little bit because our schedule got shifted around a little bit. Mm-hmm. But now I'm like, man, I really do want to read 3 or 4 at a time. But it's also kind of nice taking it very slow, reading each chapter twice to prepare for the show.
Have you read chapter 4 already?
I've not.
You've not read that one. I find myself trying to do the opposite of you, which is to not look ahead. Well, I know you want to look ahead. I actually try actively not to look ahead because I have read these books before. Well, all but The Horse and His Boy. And I want to try to forget as much of what the next thing. So I'm also trying to kind of bring myself down a little bit so I don't think too much about the future because that's what we're doing is reading this one chapter at a time.
Did you ever do that as a kid? Like I would read certain things over and over again, and I would kind of hide books from myself so that I could find them later.
I did not do that.
I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this.
Wait, is what you're implying that you would hide the books and then because you thought it would make you forget what happened in them?
It would just be they would be out of sight for a while, so I wouldn't keep going to those books.
I'd pull out a different I thought that's how you made yourself forget what happened in the books. Is if I hide them all, my brain won't remember what happened. That's how short-term memory works, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, thanks again for the email, Bruce. We really do appreciate it, and I think it's time to end the show. Well, this episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias for supporting us at the Care Paravel level.
Thanks, Elias.
Follow us into Narnia on our Twitter or Facebook pages as well. If you have feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We also always appreciate reviews in your whatever podcast app you use. This helps other listeners find the show as well. Also, make sure you subscribe to the show. That way you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. And I guess that only works if you live in the western half of the world, in the West. Because if not, I guess it's in the morning. I'm going to finish the episode. Phil's giving me a face. Thank you again for coming along on this journey. And we're going to be back next time with Chapter 4, What Caspian Did There.
Oh.
It feels like, what did he do there?
Yeah, I don't know. I legitimately do not know.
What do we do now? We ended the episode, but we're still talking. So we just let it go?
I think we just cut.